Hey, everybody, BeardoDood back with another episode of the podcast series looking at the different skill trees and other topics in Stoneshard. We're going to continue on one-handed weapons, looking at axes versus maces. And today with me is my co-commentator, DarLeeLlama.
Hello, everybody. DarLeeLlama speaking. We're doing axes and maces, two very prolific weapons in fantasy series overall, not to mention in real world combat. Axes being a civilian tool that was eventually adapted for war. Simply a large, heavy bladed edge on a long handle. Quickly became adapted to various parts of fighting and warfare in real life. And when I think of axes, I think of things like the Lone Huntsman, from fairy tales, always saving Little Red Riding Hood from the wolf, and that sort of thing. So axes are a very utilitarian tool, and definitely very powerful in Stoneshard. Comparing that on the opposite end, we have the Mace, a wide range category of various weapons, including flails, hammers, things of that nature. When I think of a mace overall, I think of Thor's hammer, and just a wide variety. I mean, if you could even see it in modern day comic books and media as well. Like Harley Quinn's baseball bat, just as a modern example. They're very wide ranged in the maces are in their form and function. And in Stoneshard, it's represented very well in its European counterpart style weapons, with flails capable of dealing bludgeoning and crushing damage, and maces and flails that have spiked heads dealing pierced. Very versatile weapon. So we're going to be taking a look at the various abilities and skill trees that come along with those. We're going to be giving our opinions on which we think is better, and we're going to be taking an in-depth look at the actual statistics provided by the Stoneshard Wikipedia and give you a direct comparison as to which of these items actually functions better with which skills, as well as taking a look at the various conditions they deal within the game themselves. Axes are known primarily for two status conditions, as well are maces known for two status conditions. Axes tend to use body part damage and bleeding, with body part damage being so complex we were not actually able to include it in the information that we provide today because of the various levels and the various types of body part damage there are. But we can give you a minor rundown on what kind of things that they can actually produce. In addition, it has bleeding, which is shared with swords, but not to the degree that swords might have. So very important weapon, very important functions for those weapons. And if you decide to use axes, that's what you can expect. Maces, on the other hand, tend to do two kinds of status effects, although they can delve into a third. Maces tend to do dazing and stunning, one of which leads into the other because of Daze's ability to afflict stun if the target is already dazed. So it's kind of a tier, daze and then stun. However, there are certain maces that can also inflict bleeding, as mentioned before, if it's spiked. We're going to start off with axes for our very first comparison. The axe tree begins with a gap closer. Gap closer, just as a reminder, is any ability that can skip forward multiple tiles to get you closer to the enemy with its use. The first ability is Mutilating Lunge. Very standard, and I'm sure many people who have used axes know and love. It has a range of 2, energy 20, cooldown 10, and it's modified by strength and agility. Now, this is where we were talking about earlier, about the exact specifics of how an ability affects the your stats affect the ability. In game, you will see that Mutilating Lunge is modified by strength and agility. What you might not know is just how much it affects it by. According to the wiki, Mutilating Lunge rushes towards the enemy and strikes with plus 100 plus 2 times strength % body part damage. So at a minimum, because everyone starts with at least 10 strength, this means it will deal 120% body part damage at the minimum. Let's say you decide to do a strength dump, it would be even more. That is actually a very good ratio for strength to any kind of % body part, or any kind of % damage, in particular body part damage. So this ability is very good for dealing body part damage. It also gets plus 20 plus 0.75 times strength and 0.25 times agility bleed chance. So 75% of your strength and 25% of your agility bleed chance. We always knew that this ability was modified by strength and agility. We just never knew how much. And according to this particular ability benefits very much from strength as compared to agility. Agility does help it, but not nearly as much. Continuing with the ability, if this attack fails to inflict injury, decrease the cooldown of the skill by 60%. Something else that we also discovered, that Beardo discovered, well, he was the one who told me, it has a hidden bonus. Most skills seem to have a hidden bonus attached to them if it's a skill that is intended to inflict damage. This particular hidden bonus has a plus 15% accuracy and plus 15% fumble chance. I really appreciate this from the developers because it means that when you use a skill, you should be able to expect that skill to hit since you are investing energy into it. Finally, it has a minus 5% cooldown duration for the skill tree, which most weapon-based skill trees are going to have. Segueing into its bleeding component. Bleeding has the ability to deal damage every turn, as we should know. Minimum of 1, I've seen as high as 5, maybe more, for an individual instance of bleeding. But those can also ramp up. So if you have 3 instances of this particular bleed at plus 2, the enemy will be taking plus 6 damage. You also restore energy at a net negative rate. That can also stack up, as is a healing efficiency at minus 30%. And each turn, it will reduce the affected body parts condition by 1%. So it makes those body parts condition worse and worse the more it stays on them. Headlighting this side of the weapons will be Beardo. So Beardo, what's your impressions of Mutilating Lunge as an ability?
Well, my first thought is it's pretty fun to have a gap closer as the first skill in the skill tree. While the range is not as wide as many of the other ones, it is really helpful to have that in the early game, especially when facing off against enemies that, you know, have spears, or if they have dash, or any, you know, when you're facing off against wolves and stuff like that. So I definitely like this one. It's definitely up there in the skills that I like using when I'm playing the axes. It's also interesting how, looking at the skill tree, all of it just kind of flows down. All the active skills go all the way to the bottom while the passives branch out to the side, as opposed to some of the skill trees kind of branch out and have active skills on the sides rather than straight down like this.
I agree. It kind of makes it so that axes are a very straightforward ability to use, or rather a straightforward skill tree to use. It doesn't, it's all business in that respect.
Yeah, because I remember when I was playing around with swords, especially when you're trying to look at what you're going to pick, you have those passives on the side, but you're also wondering, should I be spending the skill points in that, or should I be trying to get the active skills? So I do kind of like this, where if you get the treaties right away, then you can kind of just go full boat active skills, and then if you want to get the passive skills, you can get them afterwards.
I agree. I would make this a slight disagreement. Well, it's not even a disagreement. It's an observation. Mutilating Lunge to me is kind of I have a love-hate relationship with it. I love the fact, like you said, that it's a gap closer. I like all the gap closers, in particular Onrush and Heroic Charge from their respective trees. Great Sword and Sword. But, rather Sword and Great Sword. But Mutilating Lunges is an example of an ability that just barely makes the cut when it comes to being a gap closer, in my opinion. Because it's further than a range of 1, but it requires you to be so close for it to be used. You could just pass a turn and not worry about using it. It is a gap closer, don't get me wrong, but it's so close to the edge, it almost doesn't feel useful in that respect. You can't hunt animals with it, hardly. You can't. It's situational, and when you can use it to effectively hunt multiple things down, whether it's humanoid enemies or not. That being said, this ability's body part damage is crazy. I mean, it's 100 plus 2 times strength. When you basically start a fight, even over like a spear user, right? Because you can get this off on a spear user before they can actually hit you. And then you can just wound them. I mean, it massively puts the fight in your favor. So it's kind of like what we were saying. This tree is all business. Yes, it's a gap closer, but it's designed to fight enemies that are going to fight you back, not for hunting anything down.
Yeah, and that's definitely a good point. Just because the range is so low, I do find myself sometimes skipping using it, maybe opting to pop off a stance instead of using it as as a gap closer as it's intended. But the body part damage is really nice when starting off a fight and the guy's already got like a broken arm or something.
I agree. That saved me more than once. In particular, when you have to fight like 2 or more, and then you wound one of them, so that he's not going to do nearly as much damage to you as possible. If you manage to wound his arm or torso, if you hit his torso, they actually take more damage. If you manage to wound it, so it means they go down a lot quicker, and it's a lot better. It's a lot more useful in combat. I have to admit, when I think of this ability, I almost always want to take athletics along with it, just so that I can get the talent that increases range, because Mutilating Lunge needs it. It needs a range of 3 to be truly good in my heart, at least. But as it is, as an ability to get the jump on an enemy to initiate combat, it's perfect. I would rate this, I want to say 4.5 out of 5. Like I said, it's just its range is what keeps me from truly loving it. Maybe even a 4 out of 5.
Yeah, and even if you do go athletics to get that extra, it's still going to pale in comparison to getting the peak performance with, I think that's the skill, with any of the other gap closers. That really makes it like almost crazy amount of distance that you can cover with the other ones.
Yes, definitely. I find that the athletics talent point is just good overall, and it doesn't matter what kind of gap you get with it. It's just really good beneficially. Moving on to our second ability in the axe tree. It's a branch off from the first ability. We have Reprisal. Each injury affecting the target grants your attacks against it +5 accuracy and +5 crit chance. Passive bonus -5% cooldown duration for the skill tree and +5% armor penetration. So this passive particularly affects injuries. And it gives it bonus accuracy and bonus crit. You'd think that the crit chance is going to be amazingly good, I feel. In particular because axes love to have crit. And the accuracy is nice. What do you think about this ability?
I definitely, I think this was one of the first passes I did look at adding when I did play axes, just because with the axe, you are going to be causing a lot of injuries, especially when using stuff like Mutilating Lunge, or just in general, because axes just love to cause body part damage. And injury just means any kind of injury as well, because it could be bleeding or it could be body part damage. Basically, once you start getting hits off, this just starts stacking in your, pushing the battle more and more into your favor.
I definitely agree with that assessment. How do you feel about its overall usefulness during the course of an entire playthrough? How much value are you getting out of this passive through the entire time you use it?
I mean, there's definitely gonna be many battles where you're just knocking them out quickly. It's probably going to be a lot, I would imagine, more helpful on the more difficult bosses, but yeah, I mean, it still adds on. I mean, the other ones we'll look at are definitely pretty good too, but for to start off with, I mean, it's kind of, with all the passives, you can take them or leave them. So, I mean, in those regards of like, is this going to be helpful the whole playthrough, or do I want to spend my skill points elsewhere? To be honest, with a bunch of the axe ones, while I like them, I generally just try to go for the main skills. And then if I really want to, then I'll add those. Otherwise, I might look at Combat Mastery or Athletics to dump those skill points into instead.
Yeah, I think that's the point I was getting at. I find that this talent is a decent investment, but that's it. It's not like it's good. It's not like it's great. It's not like it's super good. It's decent. You'll definitely find uses for this. You'll definitely make use of this skill. For anything that takes more than 1 or 2 hits to knock down. And it definitely helps finish them because, as soon as you inflict that injury, typically with Mutilating Lunge, against that target, you'll get plus 5% accuracy and crit, and that helps wear them down. And the passive armor penetration is just good against anything you're going to run into that has heavy armor, in particular skeletons, and armored knights and bandits from the later game. But this skill loot falls off big time on anything that is not strong enough to take your initial hits. And if something is strong enough to take your initial hits, that is a cause for concern anyway.
Yeah.
So you're going to want to be using other talents. So it's decent. It's not great. It's not good. You definitely get a lot of use of that out of putting the point into it. But like, when it would truly shine, let's say against the troll, because you're going to be fighting him, for a very long time, you would have the accuracy and the crit chance all the time. But how often do you find something as tough as a troll?
And the only other instance I could see it being really useful is in ambushes, because as you're entering the other people attacking you, then you are increasing your crit chance. So it could be helpful in those situations. But most of the battles you're doing in dungeons are going to be one-on-one. You're usually tunneling the enemies, so you're only taking one at a time.
Yeah. It really hurts the fact that it's not giving you a buff. It's every injury affecting them. So as soon as that guy goes down, it's not going to help you for the other 2 enemies. Let's say you get ambushed. You have to ramp that up on them again. And you have to assume that you get an injury on them. So at high levels of power, this is not so great. At low levels of power, this is pretty good. It's kind of like one of those things. The weaker you are, the better it is.
Yeah, and there's a lot of skills like that where they're more helpful in the beginning of the game, but once you start getting later on, you almost wish that you hadn't spent the skill point in it.
Yes. I really only rate that as decent. I might give it like a 2.5 to 3.
Yeah, that's fair.
Out of 5. So, moving on to Ferocity, it is the other low-level passive of the Axis tree, branching off once again from Mutilating Lunge. Ferocity says inflicting injury reduces cooldown durations for the skill tree by 2 turns. Minus 5% cooldown duration for the skill tree, plus 10% body part damage. Again, what do you think of this ability?
This one's probably better than the previous one we looked at, Reprisal, just because of the cooldowns. So you can just continuously pop off Mutilating Lunge and Cut Through and Execution. It'll help a lot to, especially as you're inflicting injuries, which you will be doing a lot of that with the axes.
I agree. This one is another ability where the longer the fight occurs, the better off it's going to be. In particular, if you have not inflicted an injury on them. Now, if you inflict your primary injury using Mutilating Lunge and you don't inflict anything after that, this has no use because there's nothing to reduce the cooldown. Unless, of course, it does reduce the cooldown of it inflicting when you inflict with the initial ability. So that I'm kind of curious about. If I charge in with Mutilating Lunge and I inflict an injury, am I getting -2 to its cooldown? If so, that's pretty good.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me a little bit, slightly off topic, but in dual wielding, the Flurry of Blows has a passive where you basically, if you kill the enemy with Flurry of Blows, it just cuts the cooldown to 0. And most of the time, that's not going to be helpful in one-on-ones. And I almost skipped over it, but it actually turned out to be pretty good. Especially when you start facing off against multiple bad guys.
Yes, I agree definitely on that. However, I am going to disagree with the liking that ability. I personally hate that ability overall from the dual wielding tree, and I never take it. For me, Flurry of Blows is something, Flurry of Blows is something you use at the beginning of combat, not at the end of combat. I don't want to hold off on it. So, but that's just me. I do like the passive on Ferocity though, of the plus 10% body part damage. It helps you overall. It's a nice passive to have, and it's not overwhelmingly, like, oh my god, I have to pick it up for this. It's a nice bonus. But overall, I do agree. Ferocity is really good for keeping your cooldowns small, because you should be inflicting injuries left and right, particularly in mass battles. So I do like this passive much better than the other one. I would rate it higher, 3.5 out of 5.
Yeah, that's
maybe
definitely
4.
it. Yeah, it's definitely fair. Probably like in a 4. It might be one of the better of the axe passives, but we'll go through the rest of them.
Okay, going on to the next ability. We are finally going down further in the tree. We have Cut Through. It's an active ability. Target object, range 1, energy 15, cooldown 12, modified by strength and agility. Deliver a strike with plus 75% strength and 25% agility damage. Plus 10, plus 50% strength, armor penetration, and 75 plus 2.5 strength percent armor damage. Each injury affecting the target empowers the strike for 75% strength and 25% agility damage. Hidden bonus plus 10 accuracy, minus 15% fumble chance. Passive bonus, minus 5% cooldown duration for the tree. In other words, this is a strike that deals a lot of, or it deals a bonus percent, or it deals bonus percent damage. It gives a moderate percent armor penetration bonus and a very large armor percent damage bonus, dependent upon your strength. So, what do you think of this ability?
Well, you're pretty much gonna want to get this one just because aside from execution, it's gonna be one of the main skills that you're gonna use. And it's definitely more powerful than Mutilating Lunge. Yeah, and then the hidden bonuses are interesting. I didn't realize those until we looked at the wiki. So those just add to liking it more.
One thing I'll say about this ability is it once again exemplifies the importance of strength for axes in general. 75% strength, bonus damage with the strike, 50% armor pen, and 2.5 on armor damage. Let's say you start with only 10%. It means you're doing 100% armor damage total. 15% armor pen and 7.5 of your strength. So I mean, that's strength really benefits cut through as compared to agility. The only thing agility benefits is the damage percent. And when you're in game and it only says modified by strength and agility, you assume that agility has a bigger role. But looking into the specifics, strength is the king for this particular ability. And it can get pretty crazy if you have a high strength. Let's assume you do a strength dump, right? Let's say up to like what, level 10 or 11. You put all 20 points into it. You have 30 strength. Doing a quick calculation. 30 times 2.5. 75, so 150% armor damage from this ability alone. It cleaves right through armor. It really deals massive damage to their armor, making it a very good ability against armored targets, including the skeletons. So this is kind of your skeleton killer, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing we found out through this research is that it seems like axes are way more affected by strength than they are agility. Usually when you're starting and you're not looking at the breakdown like this, your assumption is, okay, it says strength and agility, then it probably means half and half. But really, even here you can tell it's 75% strength, 25% agility. So... and that it's definitely something to keep in mind, and probably a reason to do more research on your builds, because otherwise you might sink half of your points into agility and half of them into strength, when really you should probably favoring strength more so than agility, outside of just the general bonuses of crit chance and things like that from agility.
Yeah, definitely. Agility does not benefit this very much, and only vestigially, honestly.
Yeah, exactly.
I have to admit I didn't use this ability much when I played, but then again, I played right on target with, half strength, half agility, and then another time with full agility. So it's no wonder I didn't use it very much, because I didn't really have the strength to back it up. But if I had gone like much more in the strength, this might have been my favorite ability when I made that initial playthrough. It's just really good, even though if it doesn't actually deal an injury. I mean, it's a really good ability just for breaking through anything else that the target might have. The only thing it's not good against is unarmored targets. If they don't have any kind of armor, this isn't so... well, it doesn't get as much benefit. But it's still really good with a high strength, because you're getting such a high damage bonus. So... it's also really good follow-up, because each injury affecting the target empowers the strike. So like bosses, like let's say Bear, Bison, because Bison has the HP to actually, get injuries, and the Troll, this is going to be a big ability against those guys. All right, moving on to the next ability. We have Tormenting Swings. It is a passive branched off of Cut Through. Critical strikes with axes apply minus 20% bleed resistance and minus 7% max health for 5 turns. Passive bonus, 5% cooldown duration for the tree, plus 3% bleed chance. What do you think of this ability?
Like with most of the passives, I mean, it's kind of take it or leave it. But I think the main purpose of this one is to fill out more of the bleed compared to most of the other stuff. I mean... they'll relate more general to injuries, but also body part damage, at least up until this point in the skill tree. So at least there's that. It'll put more of an emphasis on bleeding your targets out. But then again, as we've discussed, once you start getting to the point where you're wanting to bleed an enemy, you're probably not going to be taking on as many where you're really... like, bleed is nice, and it definitely helped kill them faster, but it's just not... it's really only going to be more effective against heavier enemies, especially since it's only on critical strikes. So it's not like you're hitting them every strike and you're inflicting this extra bleed chance.
Here is my take on this ability. swords and daggers are the items that typically have bleed chances attached to them, correct? Like we've established that.
Yeah, definitely, especially in the last video.
Axes, not so much. In fact, the only bleed chance you're getting for this to function at all is off of its passive, which is +3 bleed chance, and that's not so great. You know, it's enough to matter, but it's not going to proc enough to really matter, is it? You know, you can give them -20% bleed chance and the -7% max health, but it's only for 5 turns. It does not stack. So if something has a very large bleed resistance, this isn't going to help necessarily against it. It might help against it, but not necessarily. My point is that most axes don't seem to have the bleed chance. Now, we will be going over the axe weapons later, but if it doesn't have the bleed chance to really make this ability shine, is it all that useful? My favorite part about this passive is actually the -7% max health. If they have a lot of health, that can really cut down on them. And for anybody else, it's just a bonus. It's bonus damage in that respect, because it means they're closer to dying. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I agree. That's why I think this is probably on the lower tier of the passives for the axes tree. Because really your main focus is going to be body part damage using axes. Bleed is just kind of a nice added bonus to anything else that you're doing.
Yeah, I find this one really skippable. I might rate it like a 2, but that's just me.
Yeah, it's pretty
Going
fair.
Going on to Massacre. It is the stance-based skill for axes. Energy 15, cooldown 10, modified by strength and agility. Activates following effect for 6 turns. +3% crit, +25% body part damage, +7.5% armor pen, +10% bleed. Using this ability's tree's skills grants 1 stack of the effect, up to 4 stacks. This basic axe attacks prolong the duration of the effect by 1 turn, up to 15 turns, but decreases its number of stacks by 1. Passive bonus, -5% CD for the tree. What do you think about this?
I mean, as stance-based skills go, most people, like we discussed last time, they can take them or leave them. I mean, most of the time, too, you can just focus on the stances that you can get out of combat mastery. Having said that, the bonuses are pretty nice, and they are very focused on what you're going to be trying to do with the axes. We'll go over the weapons later, but most of the time, I'm wanting to go for weapons that have high crit chance and really just kind of hammer home on crit chance, like I would if I was using daggers, especially because some of the axes later on, they have really high crit chance. The body part damage, that's really good. Same with the armor pen. And bleed chance, again, the bleed chance is just kind of like sprinkles on top of everything else. So, I do like it as far as stance. It's definitely geared towards axes and will bring out the best qualities when you're fighting with them.
I agree. Definitely about the bleed. This is definitely probably your major source of bleed when it comes to axes. But again, you're gonna this ability, any stance ability is a buff. It's a straight buff that you want to be able to proc before you take on something hard. It's not something you take on proc to take on a single enemy. You know, I'll sit there and I'll buff against 3 enemies or a boss, a dungeon boss. I won't mess with it otherwise. Also, there's something to be said about the changes they made the stances overall. I think generally the people who played with stances before the change liked those better. But, I mean, there's a reason for that. The developers had to change it. They were too good in a lot of instances. In particular, like the Greatsword one, parry, the parry craziness that they could manage to pull off.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And I kind of feel like that it was a necessity for that. It says on here, basic attacks prolong the duration of effect by 1 turn up to 15 turns. How long are you going to get up to 15 turns? You know, especially when you decrease its stack bonus. You know, I mean, it's kind of a juggle thing. I mean, at best, this gives you plus 40 bleed, you know, plus 30 armor pin, 100% body part damage, and plus 12 crit. That's really great if you want to take the time to actually get it up that high. And if you can get it up that high, which most of the time you won't. You know, you'd have to be fighting like a massive amount of enemies, like right outside of the last human fort or castle, or you're fighting the troll. So if it weren't for the fact that this is a necessary talent point, I would find very little use for it overall, but because it is the only buff of the tree, it still rates higher in my opinion because you can use it situationally. Yeah. So this is a decent to great talent in my opinion, depending on the situation. It's situational, and that's what kind of is good about it and what holds it back.
Yeah, and I always prefer the skill trees that have where the stance is actually optional as opposed to forcing you to pick it. But no, that's going to be the
Swords
case.
Does that, right?
Yeah, swords. The fencer stance is like one of the last ones that you can get. Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, it's all situational. You're not going to be getting into a lot of ambushes, especially if you play more carefully. Especially if you're playing permadeath, you're pretty much going to be avoiding those. But having said that, it's kind of just nice insurance to have if you are going to face off, or you get, you know, you're running through the dungeon and there's a bunch of open doors and then you've got 3 or 4 enemies coming through. Then it's kind of just nice to know that you can fall back on all those additional stat points when you're going to fight that group of enemies.
I absolutely agree with that. All right, let's move on to No Mercy. It is a passive, it is the final tier, along with the last ability. Attacking enemies with less than 30% health does plus 30% damage. Passive bonus, -5 CD for the tree, and +5 crit chance. What do you think about this ability?
So the crit chance is really nice, but going through these, I almost feel like the passives for the axes get worse the further down you go. I mean, not that this is bad, but you're gonna kind of be looking at this as this is really only gonna come into effect on like your final last maybe 1 or 2 blows against the enemy. And again, like we talked about, most of the enemies that you're gonna be fighting, you're not really gonna be needing this passive as much. Maybe when you're fighting a boss it'll come in handy, but aside from that, I mean, it does get some points in being useful just because of the bonus crit chance, the 5%.
I think I disagree with you on this one almost wholeheartedly. I think this passive is amazingly good, and it's one of the few reasons why I always pick it. It's one of the few talents whenever I play axes I always get. As you said before, most of the passives for axe are kind of like okay to subpar, right? One gives 3% bleed chance, another gives +10 body part, and the other was +5 armor pin. That's the passive bonus. Of the active passive bonus, i.e. what you're actually spending your talent point to get, you're getting plus 30% damage if they're less than 30% health. There have been plenty of times where I've hit an enemy that is sub 30 or 30% sub, and even one hit was still not enough to knock them out. So with this, you're almost guaranteeing that anything you hit at minus 30%, whether it's with an ability or not, is going to bite the dust. In particular, if you use it with a skill like Cut Through, Mutilating, or the next ability we'll be getting into. It's guaranteeing it. It helps guarantee it. But what really sells this for me is that passive bonus of +5 crit. You'll see later when we go over the weapons that crit high-end axes are more focused towards crit anyway. And I feel that's where you're coming from, is that your natural abilities are going to be able to put them down anyway. But I feel like this is one of those talent points that basically secures the win. I love that 5% crit chance on this ability, and I'm spending that talent point every time for it. 5 out of 5 for me at any rate.
Yeah, I mean, it was being a little bit harsh on it. I do see your point, and there are plenty of times where you'll be you're at maybe 30% health and the enemy's at 30% health, and you're really just clenching, wondering if your next hit is gonna end them or is it gonna whiff and end you. So no, I agree. I see the it's definitely valid putting the point in there. But yeah, like I said, with the passes,
that's the worst kind of feeling, isn't it? It's when you're basically like you're biting nails because it's like, oh my god, this might be it. My permadeath run's coming to an end because we're both at 30%, and I don't know if my final attacks are going to hit. And oh my gosh, please kill him. And then
and you run out of potions. You don't have anything for backup, and this is basically make or break. There's way too many times like that when you're playing permadeath. So I could definitely see the benefit of getting it.
The other reason I love it is because it affects your damage. So I've made arguments as to which is better, minus or plus damage taken by them or damage that you do. Well, I also like to point out that when you get bonus damage to yourself, not that this has anything to do with the bonus damage they take, but I like anything that gives plus damage because it also affects drain enchantments. So if I'm sitting there, we're both at 30%, and I know I've got a nice life drain on me, I'll feel more secure in getting more life back, from hitting them.
Yeah, definitely.
So, okay, this is the final ability of axes. It is execution. Before we get into this, I want to go ahead and read the little note that you put up. This skill is currently bugged. Crit chance increase is not as mentioned in the tooltip, but plus 5% crit chance for each remaining turn of bleeding. So it's actually better than what it describes, right?
Yeah,
it actually has.
That's what it seems like from reading the wiki.
Okay. So going over its statistics: execution, active ability, target object. Range 1, energy 20, cooldown 16, modified by strength and agility, requires an axe. Performs a strike which deals 1.2 plus 0.05 times strength, so 5% strength, and 0.025 agility, so 2.5% strength agility, damage for each missing percent of an enemy's health. We went crazy about that particular thing on daggers, by the way, just as a mention. Each injury affecting the target empowers the strike with plus 10% crit chance and plus 15% crit efficiency. Each remaining turn of bleeding affecting the target empowers the strike with plus 4% crit chance. So that is what is different. It is bugged currently to give a bigger crit chance than it says otherwise. If this strike kills the target, replenishes 35% maximum energy, hidden bonus plus 20% accuracy, minus 15% fumble chance, passive 5% cooldown for the tree. What do you think about this one?
This is definitely the most fun of them. I do think it's interesting. We have pointed out that most of the skills seem to favor strength, but this is one where actually agility favors it by 5 times over. So... yeah.
How does it?
Well, because you're doing. Oh no, I guess I read that wrong. Actually, no. So it's still the case where.
Yeah, I had to read that again.
Yeah, I thought I read it differently as 0.25, but now I see it as 0.025. So it's still half agility. So yeah, it still stands that you're gonna want to put most of your points in strength. But having said that, this is
5%
definitely
versus 2.5%.
This is definitely one of those kind of closer moves that's fun to use, especially because you almost always just lop their head off.
Absolutely. I mean, you don't know joy until you take this ability, hit someone in the face once with any other ability, and then perform execution, and their head goes flying violently against a wall. It is so fun to use. And it produces some of the biggest crits I've ever seen. I crit the troll for like 450 with this once, and it was a thing of joy. Definitely a lot of fun. But how do you feel about like the overall thing, like injury. The injury, each injury affecting the target empowers the strike plus 10% crit, plus 15% crit efficiency. Each remaining turn of bleeding buffs it by 5% crit chance.
I mean, all that just basically adds up to, especially when you're in a more lengthy fight, that it's just going to be over when you land this. If you have multiple injuries, if the enemy's bleeding, if they have any kind of health left, I mean, you're just going to overkill them.
This ability is probably the reason I like axes so much to begin with.
I mean, much like Deadly Trick, this is definitely my favorite skill out of the axe tree.
When I was using it, basically you can use it against bosses to wear them down because of the percent damage. So, you know, I got the troll boss down to like, 50%. And that means I'm doing, let's say we have an average amount of stats. It's going to basically be around 3% damage. You do an extra 2 to 3% damage for each. Yeah, 2%. 2% damage for each missing percent. That means you're doing plus 100% damage every time you use the strike. Every time. Just because you've shaved it away so much. And when you're doing big damage in the late game, particularly when you get those, broad axes being the top end axes of the game, it's a massive amount of damage. But add that, everything about this ability to me is just cake. Not only can you use it against big guys, you can use it against small guys. It really comes down to use either a basic attack or mutilating lunge, smack them in the face for one time. If you inflict an injury or bleeding, great. It gives you plus 10 crit efficiency. Or the bleeding gives you bonus crit, and then you finish them off with the execution because you've already shaved away, 40% of the health with that one big initial hit. You're getting 80% damage when you do this. So it's such a big bonus, to damage, and it basically in the late game becomes a 1-2 hit. One hit execution, one hit execution, one hit execution on everything. It doesn't matter if it's a skeleton, it doesn't matter if it's a vampire, it doesn't matter if it's human. They die violently. But the cake, the icing on the top, every time you kill the target with this ability, you get basically all of your energy back. 35% max energy back. That's crazy. That's crazy good.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna mention. It just pretty much sets you up to just constantly mow down people and just line them up.
6 out of 5 for me, man. I love this ability. It's so good.
Yeah, and definitely agree there. This is, like I said, how Deadly Trick is my favorite of the dagger abilities. This is hands down my favorite of the axe abilities, if not one of my top 3 abilities in the game to use.
Yeah, if you play daggers or if you play axes, definitely get execution and enjoy basically ripping people apart. To me, this is like the ultimate active. And this is one of the reasons I actively don't use cut down or cut through as much, because it's just basically execution.
Yeah, you don't even have time or need to use cut through once you get to execution.
Okay, so that is axes overall. Definitely one of my favorite trees. How do you feel about it?
Oh yeah, it's definitely mine. And we'll decide at the end which one is our favorite. This is actually probably a lot tougher for me between maces and axes, and that I really enjoy playing with both for different reasons. So we'll start off looking at the different axes. We'll kind of pick out what's good to start with, what's good middle range, and then of course what we like end game. So
I want to do a quick mention that axes did change with one of the later updates where they added a bunch of axes, right, for bolt thrower, because they didn't have the naval hatchet until kind of recently.
Yeah, they definitely filled it out more. What's interesting, if you look at maces, though, there's definitely way more maces than there are axes, so it was really needed that they added more axes just to kind of catch up to some of the other weapons. So what would you think, DarLeeLlama? What's like the best starting axe? I know when you play as Jorgrim, you get the Dwarven axe, which is pretty solid.
Dwarven axe is definitely one of the most solid axes out there. The only way to get it is from Jorgrim. Below that, we have the Peasant Hatchet, which you can just pick up straight from well, you can buy it, but you can typically, that's where you get it is the what's its name, where the city guard is, the place we always loot at the very beginning.
Yeah,
that's where you can get that. And then hunter hatchets, those tend to be dropped randomly out in the wild. So axes in general, like a lot of other types of weapons like swords and some maces, they're basically they fit into certain roles, right? Some are focused on getting rid of fumble, some are focused on getting rid of accuracy. Sometimes those come together, so fumble, chance, and accuracy. In other words, it's kind of like a two-hit weapon. It's more geared towards actually landing a strike. Then you have the weapons that are more geared towards critical, which is what Dwarven Axe is. +2 crit and +15% crit efficiency. Below that is the Naval, which is another fumble chance. Felling Axe, which drops off... I think that drops off a lot of enemies in dungeons, doesn't it?
Yeah, you definitely see this a lot, especially in the crypts.
So Felling Axe is your example of a tank axe, because it focuses on block, just like swords do. Swords will have block, swords, and then you've got the crit swords, which are like sabers and falchions. This is the axe beginning tank weapon. So you got crit focused, 2-hit focused, tanking focused, and then you have what I consider condition focused. Right below the Felling Axe, we have the Bearded Axe. It is kind of a hybrid in that it gives crit and bleed. It's actually one of the better axes, and it can drop as well. It's relatively cheap too, at 900. So it's kind of one of your one of those axes that you kind of aim for if you don't actually find. And then the power of the axe tends to be relatively high. Like at the very base, you have a 21 slashing, so going over to Bearded, it gets up to 25 slashing. Norse 25 slashing. It goes up incrementally, in very small amounts, just as like most other weapons do. No big change there. And then when you finally hit Barbaric Axe, which I've never seen and I'm not sure is in the game.
Someone I don't know that I've seen that one either.
I mean, there seems to be a page for it, but that's not necessarily indicative of where you could find such a weapon. But that's when it gets like really good stats. I mean, look at this weapon: +3 bleed chance, +5 crit chance, +35% crit efficiency. That's why I'm not sure it's in the game. It seems to be too good. It might just be in the files. So I don't know where the reference for this comes from. I've never seen it. It's never been sold in any of my games.
Yeah, it's a good point. I don't think I've seen that one. Yeah, I think just like you said, with all the other weapons, it really, your choice really depends on your playstyle and what you're trying to do. And even if you're like the Footman Axe is a good, or not Footman, which one am I thinking of? The Boarding Axe. So things like this are really good if you're going for more of a dual wield build to kind of compensate for the negatives that you're taking on. But at the same time, I think most everyone would agree that you really want to focus on critical and crit chance and crit efficiency ones, just because they're so good. And even just coming in at, Barbaric Axe is not one that we typically see, but even the endgame ones are really good.
Something that I've always said from when I did tabletop role-playing games and whatnot, and when I played World of Warcraft and stuff like that, it's like crowd control, right? The concept of crowd control, where you stun or take care of an enemy so that it can't harm you anymore while you're fighting other things. The thing that I've always said is death is the best form of CC, crowd control. So the faster you kill them, the better, right? axes encapsulate that entirely. You kill them quick, so you don't have to deal with them anymore. In a lot of ways, like Greatsword does. So we're looking at the Orcish axe right now. That is also not in the game that I can tell. I'm pretty certain.
Yeah, I haven't seen that
so
one.
It's kind of weird that they have stats for it at all.
The stats on it are pretty nuts.
It's stupid crazy. I mean, look at how good that is. 6% crit, 50% crit efficiency. That's like late game. That what we can actually buy now.
Yeah, and it's only showing for 1,800 crowns too. So
yeah, most of the axes are going to be geared towards either crit chance, crit efficiency, or block or to hit. That is what I have noticed. And then there, of course, like the boarding axe is kind of a combination of the two, where it has minus 5% fumble, plus 3% block. But when you get to the late game, right? Let's skip down to the late game axes. These are the ones that you're going to be concerned about when you hit a level, I want to say 12, right? A level 12 seems to be about right when you would have that amount of reputation to start buying these things. There's really there's only a few choices here. The knightly axe and broad axe, heavy broad axe. Reinforced axe is not in the game. And Bryn hatchet and rider axe, which they deal decent damage, but they fall off on that because the others are going to be doing like 32, 35, and you want high base damage. The Bryn hatchet is your 2-hit option. The rider axe is the other 2-hit option. Knightly axe is your only option for tanking. Knightly axe being the only one high-end axe that gives actual block chance. And even it gives crit chance. That's how focused axes are towards crit. The very best axes in the game are broad axe and heavy broad axe, because they give so much stats. Plus 2 accuracy, plus 7 crit, plus 40% crit efficiency for the broad axe, plus 2, plus 9, plus 60 for the heavy broad axe, and a massive amount of penetration for armor, armor pin, and body part damage. My personal favorite being the heavy broad axe. This is one of the reasons why we say Mutilate is basically a super finisher, because your crit should be so high. You're constantly getting this plus 60% crit efficiency. You're going to be critting a lot. You're going to be smashing them down big time. Worth every penny. But that is where axes are focused. If you try and take it in other direction, like tanking, Rider and Bryn are your really, Knightly. Rider for to hit, and Bryn for tanking. No, Knightly for tanking, Rider for to hit is going to be your best options.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I'm going through right now with Jorgrim, because I'm doing a dual wield build, so that's kind of where I'm settling on. Do I want to, because the way that dodge and block work is basically one follows the other, so it'll roll for dodge and then it'll roll for block. So I have been wondering, because I have such low armor as a dual wielder, would it be worth it to put more focus into defense, or especially with the fumble chance, because with using 2 axes as opposed to 1, you run into that issue. But there's huge appeal to use the broad and heavy broad axe. They just look awesome, and then the skills just seem unreal. The bonuses.
One thing that I think people might underestimate is how much the penetration stats matter. And the fact that the heavy broad axe gives 120 points of penetration type stats, so armor damage, armor pin, body part, is super necessary in order to beat your enemy, basically, And the Knight Rider, the Rider axe only gives 50. How can that compare? It's not as good. It just can't compare. Bryn hatchet only gives 60. Knightly hangs in there by giving 95. So that's why, to me, the only real options are Knightly axe and the broad axes. That's why. But like we said, the heavy and the regular broadaxes complement what Axe is trying to do so well. I don't see any reason not to use them over any other axe, even the knightly. Even if you're trying to be a tank, you should still go for heavy broadaxe. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, the only drawback is the price if you're trying to buy them from the merchants, which I think is really the only way you can get them. That is a pretty hefty sum to pay and to save up. So, if you're looking at, you don't have 7,200 gold or more, depending on your reputation, you might be seriously considering, at least for the time being, investing in one of these other three axes. Definitely, probably of the three, you'd want to go with knightly axe, and then just start saving all of your money to get one of these bad boys.
Now we are going to head over to maces. Maces being a very good weapon selection, featuring 2 debuffs that you will be very happy to see your enemy have: Daze and Stun. Starting with Onslaught, type target object is an active ability, range 1, energy 20, cooldown 12, modified by strength and agility. Delivers a strike, which burns strength plus 50% of your agility of target's energy and has 40 plus strength percent chance to inflict knockback. If the first strike successfully knocks the enemy back, the attacker advances and delivers an extra attack with minus 70% damage with 30 plus 75% of your strength, 25% of your agility, daze chance. If you fail to inflict knockback, the cooldown is reduced by 80%. Hidden bonus, the first strike has 10% accuracy, minus 15% fumble chance. Passive bonus, minus 5% cooldown duration for the skill tree. Going over quickly over the debuffs: Daze, knockback resistance minus 25%, stun resistance, psionic resistance, fumble chance. They all receive minus 25% or plus 5% fumble chance, and they cannot use abilities. Interesting about Daze, if you daze someone already dazed, they get stunned. Stun is set dodge chance to 0, counter chance to 0, block chance to 0, psionic resistance minus 50%, and you cannot perform any actions. That is very different compared to abilities. If you cannot perform actions, you cannot move, you cannot do anything, whereas Daze simply is you cannot use energy using abilities of that nature. What do you think of Onslaught?
I think for somebody that played with the other weapon types before doing more of the knockback types like staves and maces, this is definitely the intro to doing daze and stun. You're gonna have a lot of fun getting your enemies into corners or against walls and stunning them. It's a completely different way to look at combat compared to, like we were talking about with axes, or even last week with swords and daggers, and that in the fun way, you're basically immobilizing them and you're just whacking them for free. You don't have to do anything other than just continue to whack them.
I agree. Axes and swords and daggers are basically run up and attack. I mean, they have their different abilities and whatnot, but I mean, there's no need for positioning. As long as you can hit them, everything's good. But positioning becomes so important whenever you use any kind of knockback, because the knockback can inflict the stun. I like to think that Onslaught was kick before kick came around, because if you fail to inflict the knockback, the cooldown's reduced by 80%. 80% cooldown from the cooldown is about 2 to 3 turns. So it's got a very short timer if you miss the knockback. Other than that, it's a damaging ability. It burns energy, which is very nice, particularly against like a dungeon boss, for example. Maybe not so against like a Pud bandit or maybe wolf. No big deal in burning their energy. But the knockback is what you're really using this for. In particular, because you have a chance to get an attack on them if you knock them back. And you have a chance to affect that daze just from the ability. That's in addition to whatever your weapon gives you. So, very, very nice ability. Very good. I think, in particular, in dungeons. In dungeons, it shines. In the forest, you have to use positioning.
Yeah, I mean, it's so much fun to use in the dungeons, but I think one of my favorite parts is that um was it if you don't cause knockback, then it reduces the cooldown. So if you do whiff it or if you just hit them normally, you're gonna get another chance really quickly.
You can semi spam it,
Yeah, it's
but
pretty close to being able to.
like kick, you just spam. Onslaught, you can kind of spam, but it's a lot better than kick. So
Yeah, definitely.
definitely good ability. I rate it very high. 4 out of 5.
Yeah, I agree. This is definitely one of the better starting abilities. I actually like this one probably more than I like Mutilating Lunge on the axes.
We are now moving over to Dazing Strikes. It is the first passive branch off from Onslaught. Requires a Mace. Mace attacks have plus 5% dazed chance. Standard passive bonus, CD for the skill tree, and 3% accuracy. How do you feel about this one?
I mean, as far as the passives go, I think this is almost a go-to, especially because your main focus as playing maces is going to be doing the daze damage, which is definitely a different opinion than what I had of the axes. But especially if you're starting off and you only have those two skills, I almost always just go ahead and sink it into that just for the added daze chance.
That is one thing that is relevant. I'm glad you brought up. Um, Axes are, as we said before, they're very crit oriented, but they're also very penetration oriented. Penetrating through armor, penetrating with body part damage, that sort of thing. The thing you find on most maces are going to typically be some percent of daze or stun. And that is a super important factor for maces in general. Late in maces will have penetration stats, but most of them will have either daze or stun, or both. And that's what makes them truly good. I know in the axes, some of the passives we passed up had passive bonuses similar to this, but they just weren't. They are not as good as this because of the daze being so important. The fact that daze can lead into stun makes this truly good. And then the accuracy is a nice bonus. I agree with you. It's worth the talent point every time.
Yeah, it's one of the better, I think one of the better starting passives for sure.
Agreed. Let's go ahead and move on to our next ability, which is Armor Break. It is the lead-off ability from Dazing Strikes, but not. Or it is an active ability. So, we mentioned before that the Axe's ability was kind of straightforward. It was a straight line, and you branched out from that. Mace is a little different. It's kind of set in a strange, weird tier. So the active abilities are kind of all around the place. But Armor Break is the next active. Type target object, range 1, energy 15, cooldown 10, modified by strength alone. Performs an attack with 10 plus 50% of your strength, armor pen, and 100% flat armor damage. If the enemy is dazed, deals 2 times your strength percent armor damage for each remaining turn of the daze. If the enemy is stunned, grants 7.5 times your strength percent armor damage for each remaining turn of the stun. Applies the enemy with 10% damage taken for 3 turns and 30% stun resistance for 3 turns. Reduces cooldown duration for the skill tree by 2 turns. Hidden bonus 10% accuracy, 50% fumble chance, 5 CD passive for the skill tree. What do you think about this one?
I do like this one. I think it's definitely more geared towards armored enemies, so I typically reserve it for those situations. But yeah, I definitely use it and I like it. The daze and stun bonuses are also very nice. So if you do have an armored target against the wall, I mean, this is a very strong skill to use.
I agree that this is definitely for armor targets. It definitely lives up to its name, Armor Break. I know a lot of new players have complained about getting to the skeleton section. They have no problems doing the human dungeons, but once they get to the skeletons, they run into some problems. If you're having problems against skeletons, there's a reason for it. And that reason is they have bonuses against slashing, piercing, and rending, as far as I know, damage. Not too sure about the rending, but I know that they don't take as much damage from slashing type stuff or piercing. Crushing, they actually take extra damage from. So if you ever have a problem with that type of dungeon, this is the ability for you. I'm actually quite amazed at how big of a bonus that this particular ability gets. If the enemy is dazed, which if you're using maces, they're going to be dazed all the time, 2 times your strength. And if they're stunned, 7.5 times your strength. That's pretty high. That's like super high bonus, particularly considering it only works off strength. You could strength dump on this and get massive armor damages to the enemy. Like, just blast through their shield, and they don't have a shield anymore. What can they do? So,
yeah, I'm almost thinking that all of the bonuses are because the main reason you would pick up this or use this skill is against somebody that has armor. If you're fighting wolves or bears or, you know, any of the lower level mobs, it just doesn't have the same effect as if you're fighting later in the game with somebody that's fully armored up.
I agree. It's definitely best against armor, but at least it does come with some other bonuses. Like, it applies that plus 10% damage taken and stun resistance. So you could use this as a setup. You use Armor Break, and then you use that to start stunning the crap out of your opponent. And it does also have the duration, cooldown duration of the skill tree by 2 turns. It reduces it. So let's say you have another ability on cooldown you really want to use, but it's not near. It's only 2 or 3 away. You use Armor Break, and it comes back instantly. So that's very nice. It says the skill is currently bugged. Plus 100% armor penetration. Plus 10. Plus half your strength armor damage per day's stun duration is also not the same as in the in-game tooltip. So wait a minute. 100% armor pen. Where's it getting armor pen? Performs an attack with 10 plus half your strength.
I think it's saying that it's flipped, right? Because on the tooltip itself says plus 100% armor damage. I think what they're implying is that those are flipped.
Ah, okay. So it always has 100% armor pen, and it deals 10 plus half your strength armor damage.
Yeah, that's how I was reading it.
So this attack completely ignores armor. That's even better. That's really good. It means they just don't count for having armor at all. That means no protection, right?
Yeah, that's how I would read it.
Wow, that's actually really good. It obviously is bugged and it's not functioning as it's supposed to, but now that I think about it, I mean, if you're basically denying them all armor from the very get-go, because penetration would be better than armor damage. Armor damage is just going to, you know, ruin whatever armor they have, whereas the penetration means it just cuts right through it.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that bug is kind of too strong.
Yeah,
if that's the case.
I'm assuming that's going to get fixed eventually. That's probably, out of all the bugs that we've looked at on the skills that we've looked at so far, it's probably the worst one. I mean, good in terms of for the player, but not for, you know, balance in the game.
Yeah. So definitely I want to give that skill a lot more usage next time I use maces. I want to give it a try and see if it actually is as good as I'm expecting it to be.
Mm-hmm.
But overall, I feel like this skill is actually nice to have, but best used against armor targets. We agreed on that. Yeah, definitely. Very nice option to have, in particular because maces are so good against armored anyway. This basically ruins any armor or skeleton's day. So very nice to have against those shield bros in the late game, or even the mid game.
Yeah.
Hate those guys.
When in regards to the skeletons too, I mean, axes are really good in that regards because the only thing that the skeletons have are bones, so you can easily do body part damage on them.
Yeah.
So both
you still get a negative to damage, but like late game, they're not going to stand up to all that injury.
Yeah.
So, yeah, skeletons can be damaged too. They can be injured too. That's very important to know. And they definitely don't like having their their limbs broken.
No,
it
definitely
makes them
not.
very sad. Moment of weakness. Passive, stun enemies take 30% more damage. Passive bonus, minus 5% cooldown duration for the tree, plus 10% armor damage. Beardo, what do you think of this one?
Yeah, I mean that is again, it's looking like the passives are pretty great. I mean, the entire goal of using the maces is to ultimately stun the enemy. So once you have them stunned, to get 33% additional damage, and that's crazy. And then the passive bonus of the extra armor damage is just gonna add on top of that.
I agree. I think it's really important to if you want to play maces, and I'm saying this to you guys out there watching this video, if you want to play maces, you need to understand something big time. You want to be dealing daze, you want to be dealing stun. If they're not being dazed and if they're not being stunned, you're going to be sad, because that's the whole point of playing a mace to begin with. When you get them into stunned, which is the most ideal position to have them in, this passive will wreck the crap out of them. Because you go from... this is on par to why I like right on target so much. Right on target being that giving you that sweet plus 35% weapon damage. This is the same thing. Stunned enemies take 33% more damage. And you get that for an ability that is only 3 points deep into its skill tree. That is insanely good. Plus a very high passive bonus on armor damage. Not that you kind of need it. You're already playing, crushing damage anyway, but this is actually, like you said, a very, very good passive ability, and I never pass it up. I always get Moment of Weakness. I rate it very highly. I love this damn ability, and I love stunning the crap out of my opponents with maces to do it.
And it's funny you brought that up too, because when you're playing maces and you don't get a daze or a stun, you really are sad, because you're really just doing, it just seems like moderate or normal damage. Like you're not, like when you're doing axes, you're getting all the body part damage. When you're doing sword, you're looking for the bleed. When you're doing the daggers, you're looking for those high crits. If you're swinging with the mace and you don't hit a daze or a stun, yeah, you're not gonna be happy about it.
Yeah, I've yelled at my monitor. I'm like, stun him, daze him, stun him, stun. Come on, stun!
And
it really kills me not to get that on them.
In some ways too, it does provide somewhat of a vulnerability when you do play maces, because if you are finding a target and you aren't getting those dazes or stun, and it is really going to affect the combat and the outcome of that battle.
Big time.
I've definitely, in my permadeath runs with the maces, I've definitely died the most using the maces compared to other ones that I've done. Just because I'll get in a situation where someone's tougher than I thought, and I'm not getting any kind of daze or knockback going on.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to Respite. Passive that requires a mace. A successful stun with a mace hit replenishes 20% of max energy. Minus 5 CD for the tree, plus 3% energy restoration. What do you feel about this one?
I mean, this is definitely, if you're spamming a lot of attacks, or maybe even you've sunk points into Mighty Kick, I would say. If you're already doing stuns, you probably are going to go into athletics to get that skill just for the extra knockback. Being able to get that much energy back, especially since you will be looking to stun the enemy, Although I guess that is a question, right? If you stun an enemy without using Mighty Cake, that probably isn't going to trigger on this. But
it won't.
you can.
It says specifically with a mace hit.
Yeah, but if you're just trying to spam a lot of attacks, getting that 20% energy back is nice, and then in that same regard, it's giving you faster energy restoration as well. Probably not as good as the other two passives, but definitely one to consider as you're going down the tree and spending your points.
I agree with you, but I'm even more positive towards this passive. I love this damn passive. I'm a fan of any ability that can replenish a good amount of energy, because it means that I rely less on finding specific equipment like, you know, what's the name of that curse? Soul Stealer?
Mm-hmm.
The one that gives you a high amount of energy drain.
Yeah.
Or just energy drain enchantments in general. Because, you know, those give overall a very minor amount of energy, but since you always start with at least 100 energy on your characters typically, right? At least 90. You know, you can expect about 15 to 20 points of energy every time you land a stun with this. And that's big. Like, I've sat and smashed a bear over and over and over the head with mace hits and got all my energy back, and then I just started using abilities all over again. Add on top of that a passive 3% energy restoration. This is also one of my go-tos. I never pass this passive up. And it's like what you said earlier. Mace Tree has a ton of great passive skills as compared to the Axe Tree where we had to debate it. I have never once passed on a passive from the first two tiers of Mace. They are that good to me. I love this ability.
Yeah, it is interesting, especially when you go tree to tree. Some have... You want to get all the passives, some you're pretty happy to skip, and then, you know, some are 50-50, but yeah, I mean, most of these passives, they really complement the style of combat you're going to be doing as well, and they just kind of feed off of each other. The first one was, I can't remember all of them, but I know there was like the plus to the damage, the plus to the, the first one was plus to daze, then plus to damage, then plus to your energy. I mean, those are all really good things to have, for sure.
It does everything that you want it to, you know? You want more energy. You want more dazing. You know, you want more damage once you've stunned them. You know, I mean, it's just all really focused and really good. But then there are trees like, you know, in dual wielding, I have to actually justify whether or not I want to take certain ones, you know? Or, what was the other one? There have been a couple trees where it's like, you know, do I justify a talent point? You know, is it justifiable? For me, these passives every time. I take them every time. They're that good. Let's move on to Hammer and Anvil. It is an active skill, no target. Energy 15, cooldown 10, requires a mace. It is the stance-based skill of the tree. Activates the following effect for 6 turns. Minus 5% fumble chance, plus 35% armor damage, plus 7.5% daze chance, plus 10% knockback chance. Using this ability tree skills grants 1 stack of the effect up to 4 stacks. Basic mace attacks prolong the duration of the effect by 1 turn up to 15 turns, but decrease the number of stacks by 1. Minus 5% cooldown duration for the tree. What do you think?
I mean, and we'll continue to say this about the stances. I mean, you're mostly going to be popping them off when you're in a sketchy situation or you're going to face off against a boss or multiple enemies. Everything, I mean, the knockback, daze, those are definitely complementary to everything that we've seen so far on the maces. So... yeah, I mean, in that regard, I'd say it's about as good as all the other stances.
I feel like this one is a kind of an underdog. Let's say you get a bear up against a tree. You know, bears are typically pretty scary. But you get plus 40% knockback once you ramp it up. So you're slamming that bear into the tree 40% of the time. And that has its own individual chance to stun. In addition to that, you have a 30% chance to daze. If you daze them once and then daze again, stunned. So this has the potential to basically allow you to kill bosses greater than you could normally be able to take on, as long as you have the ability to survive just a few instances of their damage. If you're not able to take them on for the full length, but if you could get them to the point of stun, I feel like this is really good. It's really, really good. But it's like with all stances, right? They're so situational, you know. Can you use it now? Is it worth it to use it now? You know, always worth it to pre-buff. But if they're right up on you, I wouldn't use it during combat. Not unless I really, really wanted it. And definitely not for this. I don't feel like this is such a game changer like the Axe one. The Axe one directly affects your damage potential. This one affects your debuff potential. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. No, totally.
So, I don't know. How do you feel about stances in general? Like, what's your stance on stance-based skills?
I mean, I think we mentioned it in the last one, and I guess we can talk about it a little bit here. But it's most of the time they are kind of in a position where it's mandatory to have them anyways, except for like with swords. It's almost hard to justify using the point unless you're forced to. And even on here on maces, you can get away without even getting hammer and anvil. You can focus on the other stuff. But yeah, like we said, it's always situational, and some stances are definitely better than others. And combat mastery does really complement the stances very well early on. So I don't know. I always end up getting the stance-based skill, but I probably don't use it as much as I would like to, or I think that I do. I probably use it a lot less. Unless, like I said, you're getting into really sketchy situation where there's, you know, multiple enemies coming at you and you have the time and you go, oh, hey, I should pop that off before they show up. But there's times, too, where that I'm in that situation and they roll up on me and I'm like, oh, I forgot to pop off the stance.
Yeah, you bring up a good point, actually. You don't actually have to pick up this. Everything branches off from a different branch. So you do not have to pick up hammer and anvil. And the more I think about it, the more I think, I don't think I need this, you know? I don't think I need it.
Yeah,
so,
and
it's good, it's an underdog, don't get me wrong. But do I want to spend the point when I could go get something in athletics or combat mastery? You know, something complementary.
yeah, and that was kind of a big game changer in adding combat mastery and athletics, because it really makes you step back and think, okay, if I'm only getting up to level 10, 12, maybe 15, I'm really going to look at all of the skills and really count up, okay, do I want to get peak performance or do I want to max out the tree? So, yeah, and I think that added a really interesting aspect to how we built, like, basically build out our different builds. So, yeah, that's why I always look at them. In some cases, like with the axes, it was like right away. Not right away, but if you want to get to the end game, you're gonna have to get it. So it is kind of nice that it's positioned just in a way that you could get 7 out of the 8 skills and not touch hammer and anvil.
Yeah, really. Let's move on to finish off. Finish off is the equivalent to execution and what was the dagger one? Deadly trick. It is the finisher ability. It does not actually have a.
I think it's coup de grace.
Coup de grace.
Yeah.
Oh, for swords.
No, for daggers. The finisher move was coup de grace.
Most weapon trees have some sort of finisher. This is the finishing type for maces. So active target object, range 1, energy 20, cooldown 12, modified only by strength. So once again, strength super important to maces. Delivers a strike with a flat plus 10% damage. If the enemy is dazed, adds 50% strength percent damage for each remaining turn of daze and prolongs it by 4 turns. If the enemy is stunned, adds twice your strength percent damage for each remaining turn of stun and prolongs it by 1 turn. puts all enemy abilities on cooldown. To specify, puts all enemies abilities on cooldown actually means it puts them on their maximum CDs. What that means, here's how I'm translating that, by the way. Some of those abilities, like in Combat Mastery, have like a massively high cooldown of like 100 turns. But when you factor in all of the cooldown duration reduction, it makes it into a manageable level. As an example, what this does is it just puts it at the maximum. So there is no cooldown duration applied. It is just bam, 100 turns, for example. Hidden bonus plus 20% accuracy. That's actually a very high crit or accuracy bonus compared to the others. And then 15% fumble chance, standard minus 5% cooldown duration for the tree. Do you like this one, Beardo?
And it's definitely a good finishing move, and it complements all the other skills and really highlights the importance of daze and stun. I do like the added ability that it will, like, let's say you use it and it doesn't actually do what it says, which it says finish off, so you assume, but then it'll put all the enemies' cooldowns on their maximum cooldown. So if you didn't finish them off, you're probably going to finish them off in the next few hits. It might even be the kind of skill that you don't necessarily wait to finish off. You might actually want to use this before, especially if you're into inspecting and watching your enemies' cooldowns, or like, especially when you're fighting the troll, if their cooldown ends and they're about to pop off that skill, you can come in and use this and just disrupt anything that they were planning to do.
Yeah, I have to admit, I never thought much of this ability, and I tend not to get it. But looking at the specifics, I'm actually more impressed with it, in particular by its damage percent bonuses. Definitely putting all the enemies' abilities on cooldown is great. No ifs, ands, or buts. That's just a great ability. But the fact that if they're dazed, you can prolong that daze by 4 turns just by using this one ability is actually quite nice, and it gives a fairly decent strength bonus percent to damage. But it also gives 2 times the percent if they're already stunned, and since we want them to be stunned, that's actually quite a big hit. So let's say you're running 30 strength, right? That's 60%. So whatever your basic hit is, you're getting plus 60% damage, and you prolong the stun. So it just keeps them stunned. It deals a big hit, and that's great. If they're dazed, you prolong the daze. That's great. It's just a pretty good ability. I underestimated it. I might consider getting it more in the future now that I read the specifics, but only if you dump strength. It benefits super hard from strength, and it's just not as good if you don't have strength. If you decided to go some kind of agility build, don't pick it up. Avoid it altogether, I say. Unless you want that one ability, put all enemy abilities on cooldown. That is the only good use you will get out of it then. At least that's my opinion.
Yeah, I definitely rate this one highly as far as finishing moves. There's a really great I guess synergy or energy between all of the different mace skills compared to some of the other trees. It really seems they all just kind of feed off each other, and just everything just becomes more strong, especially the more of these skills that you pick up, even with the passives.
I think for finishers, I prefer it when they have bonus percent depending on how much damage you've done to them, but that's just me. This is still a pretty good skill.
Yeah, I mean, it is that's a good point, but I think just in the fact that it prolongs daze and stun, it just speaks to the entire tree. If you're using a mace, yeah, damage is cool, but really you're wanting to disorient the enemy and just bash them repeatedly. It doesn't really matter. And you do get some percentage damage. You get the 10% damage on the strike as well. So, yeah, I like the sound of this one. I'm definitely going to be shooting for this one in the Mace's build I'm playing.
Yeah, I agree with that. Let's go into the final ability. It is Concussion. It is a passive. Each Mace strike applies minus 5% stun resist for 4 turns. This effect stacks. Passive bonus, 5% CD for the tree, and 5% weapon damage. How do you feel about this one, Beard?
I mean, again, the passives for this tree just keep proving themselves to get better and better, it feels like. And any passive that's going to get straight up weapon damage percentage is pretty cool. But on top of that, I mean, you're just stacking on to wear them down, so your stuns are going to happen. Whether that's on the first hit, if you didn't get the first hit, you're just increasing the chance as the battle goes on that you are going to stun them.
I agree. One thing of note is we were talking about how good can you combo particular weapon strategies with particular weapons. By saying that, you know, the passives just keep proving themselves to be good and good and better and better. I'm looking at this right now, and I notice that Maces have 3 passives all on the left, and you can just straight shoot through them as long as you have the books. So you get the starter ability, Onslaught, and then 3 of the key passives, ignoring the energy one. You could combo that with dual wielding and just do a dual wielding build for 8 points. You're like super passive maces, and then primarily dual wielding for your actives. Yeah, and that could be pretty strong. If you think about it.
To be honest, when I was looking at my dual wield build, it was a very tough decision to go between axes and maces for that exact reason. Because when I was looking at it, I was like, okay, if I dig into maces, right after just a few skill points, I've got all the passives. I'm at the most powerful passive in the tree. Especially with dual wielding, the main issue with dual wielding, and we'll talk about it in a future video, is deflect. And once you get to getting, you know, Berserk Tradition, Flurry of Blows, and those, you're really eyeing that, and you're like, I don't know if I want to go to the bottom. I mean, the bottom skills definitely look fun, but it just gives more. Looking at maces, it just makes me wish that maybe I had gone dual wield maces, although dual wield axes is very fun too. There's not really, you can't really go wrong either way, and you of course can do multiple playthroughs.
This is another ability that the effect stacks, and it stacks for 4 turns. So here's my question, right? And maybe you can give me an answer, or at least theorize with me. We take Flurry of Blows. It does 4 attacks in 1 turn. Okay. How many of these minus 5% stun resist can we get off within 4 turns? If each Mace strike applies minus 5% stun resist and we hit them with Flurry of Blows, would we automatically get up to minus 20% stun resist on the first turn?
You know, that is a really good question. That's one of those. Yeah, no, it would be really good. And that's definitely, you know, it's something we should test for science. But yeah, I've been wondering that myself. I should probably pay a little bit more close attention when I'm using Flurry of Blows to see what kind of effect I'm having on the enemy. If I do have any of these passives that stack, because you would think if you hit them 4 times and you're hitting them with just maces, you should be getting them to negative 20 on that first hit with the Flurry of Blows.
Many people might think, oh, it's stun resistance. How many people walk around with stun resistance? Well, when you run into stuff with stun resistance, this can matter a lot. So I actually rate this passive very highly just for that. And no one is going to object to getting bonus weapon damage. 5% is good. It stacks, it ramps up. I think this passive is quite good. So
well, and to keep in mind too, one of the recent changes in Bolt Thrower was that there's not really individual stun, knockback, resist, all those. It's between control and move resistance now. So, I mean, if the enemy, if the enemy's armor has move, I'm guessing control resistance. I'd probably need to go and look through that again before I say. But if they have any kind of control resistance, then yeah, you're gonna want to try to get stun resistance down, even though it's, you know, just the one. one
Yeah, this should be
resistance.
control. The other is move. So
Yeah.
that's immobilization and I believe confusion. So, but yeah, minus 5% control resistance, and it has the potential when you dual wield for stacking up high. But even if you're only using a single weapon, still very good passive. I approve of it, and I think you do too, Birdo.
Yeah,
I think
definitely. Like I said, or like you pointed out, I mean, there's no reason if you're gonna go dual wield and you're gonna do maces, you might as well just fly down the left side of the tree, and then think about, okay, do I want armor breaker and the other ones?
Well, I would definitely pick up the energy one. I think armor break is very worth it at the moment, and the energy passive is. I'm not too certain about the stance and the finisher. You like the finisher a lot more than I do, but definitely all the passives are worth it to me. So 6-point invest, you're still good on good maces. Whereas with axes, I tend to get maybe all of them.
Yeah,
But
it's a good point.
all right, we're ready to move on to weapons if you are. We're going to go through and deal with the most common weapons and the best weapons and our preferences, and also what kind of types they are, what kind of type, what roles the weapons fall into.
One thing that we didn't mention on the axes is the critical damage. For all the weapons, they have a unique thing that they do, and in this case, for maces, they pretty much give a 100% chance to daze the enemy for 2 to 4 turns if you get a critical hit. I don't know if we mentioned that with axes. I'm pretty sure it's 50% increased body part damage. So something to keep in mind when you're picking out your weapons. It's just an added bonus on top of everything else that you're doing.
Kind of like how swords hit 3, as well as staves. Well, great swords and staves hit 3 rows in front of you. That's what happens with the crit for those weapons. For the crit for these weapons, they're going to lose a limb, or they're going to get dazed.
Basically.
And again, if you daze someone who's dazed, they get stunned, which is why I love getting crits on maces. So I love stacking crits in general, but I love it even more so on maces because it's almost guaranteed to stun most common enemies. And I've beaten bears where they haven't even touched me, just because my stun rate was so high. So
that's definitely a good feeling.
Oh, it's the best feeling in the world. So, well, aside from seeing the body or the head fly off using an axe against the wall,
exactly.
But
It's a
a bear.
That's a debate on its own right there.
Most of the beginning clubs I do not care for at all. Amazingly, the peasant flail is the standout, and you can quickly get those from going out and fighting a few of the bandits that have these basic nunchucks, basically. And the reason I find it to be so good is it comes with a 2% inherent daze, 2% stun, along with crit chance and efficiency, with fairly good penetration stats. The only thing that suffers is accuracy and fumble, and that's because it's just typically an unwieldy weapon. That's not as big of a detriment as you would think it to be, particularly considering you're going to be stunning and dazing the crap out of them. I would much rather have those percentages. What do you think?
I mean, you're basically using nunchucks. When you get the they call it the peasant flail, but they might as well call it the nunchucks. That's what it looks like. But yeah, no, I think this is definitely the go-to for anybody starting off with maces. And the step up from that, and you'll, in the same regard with the peasant flail, you'll find a militia flail if you're fighting enough enemies. And it's just a little bit of a boost compared to the peasant flail. You'd be well off just using the peasant flail until you get into the further down the weapon tree. But yeah, it's kind of the interesting thing. There's really just a single go-to with the maces. There's not really any reason to try the other ones unless you just haven't found a peasant flail.
I would even argue the peasant flail can be better than the militia flail if you are dual wielding, because with dual wield, what you're doing is you'll get a bonus 1% on each for daze and stun for each hit. So you'll have a 3% chance to stun, 3% chance to daze for each swing. because your side one isn't contributing as much. If they did, it would be like way too broken. You couldn't have 4% of each just by wielding 2. Instead, it evens out to 3% on each. If you use Militia Flail single-handed, you have 4% stun. But when I used 2 Militia Flails, I only ended up, for some reason, getting 5% stun last time I played, as compared to 6%. If it had been 6% straight, that would have been better than the Peasant Flail. But the Peasant Flail gave me that 1 extra percent of daze or stun. And since dazes lead into stun, I still kind of prefer the Peasant Flails. Because you're not getting that much more damage, you are getting a little bit extra stats. But they're comparable, is what I'm trying to say. Why buy Militia Flails when you can just rock Peasant Flails? And those are cheap and free, and just by killing a couple of bandits, as mentioned before. So
yeah, definitely
very cost efficient, very easy to get.
Yeah, all valid points. I mean, the only problem with dual wielding is, of course, the fumble chance. I mean, there's not much of a difference between the two, but that's always going to be, fumble chance and accuracy is always going to hurt you. I mean, obviously it's going to be less if you're dual wielding, but you have more chance to whiff compared to just single hand. But it is a fair point. If you are connecting on all of them, you're going to get far more out of the Peasant Flail than having 2 Militia Flails.
The 2 other early maces you'll see a lot are Militia Club and Heavy Club. They're right below Militia Flail. Militia Club is the tanking option you have for the early game because it gives block and it still gives daze. It's a standard okay weapon, but I tend not to use it. I just prefer the flail. And then I don't care for the Heavy Club at all. Whenever I see it drop off the first boss, I never use it.
Yeah, so far I've just passed it up. I'll just keep the Peasant Flails.
War Flail, to me, and Spike Flail become your mid-tier or mid to early options. They appear in Manshire at the earliest. I prefer the War Flail to the Spike Flail, but the Spike Flail does give stun and bleed, and that can be important if you want to inflict bleed. It also has a nicer crit chance and efficiency, but I feel like War Flail is easier to get overall, and I prefer the higher chance to stun, typically, but that's me.
I haven't gotten far enough to pick one, although I just like how the Spike Flail looks, and it's funny because it's got all those spikes, so of course you're gonna inflict some bleed chance. Yeah, but it is pretty comparable. It is interesting. It gives less crit efficiency, but has a higher crit chance, and it does more body part damage than armor penetration. It's interesting, the trade-offs here. Between the two.
I thought the flail gave more efficiency, but it does not. It gives higher crit.
Yeah.
So, but those are the very comparable ones. They're the same damage range, same wealth range. As the Warhammer is also in there as well, but that's going to be your tanking option. Obviously, it gives block chance, block power, and a decent stun and daze chance. So, but the problem with Warhammer compared to the War Flail and the Spike Flail is it starts to get really nasty skills energy costs at 30% compared to the 20% the other two do. So it depends on whether or not you're going to basic attack a lot or if you're going to use skills. Maces overall are going to have high energy costs. So something you'll have to deal with.
It's tough. I think that, axes definitely look pretty cool, but maces, they just look like they're just gonna, like that giant hammer is just, you're just gonna wreck people. And I know that once you get to the dungeons in Manshire, it is common to see those drop off when you do that last human dungeon. I've seen a number of them drop off the enemies from there. But the price isn't too bad, so it's probably more worth it to get it beforehand than having to deal with somebody that has it and you don't.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Moving on to the late game. A lot of these maces are not in the game, like the Vivode Bludgeon, and the Shishbar. I don't think. Well, is the Shishbar part of the Troll Quest reward? It might be.
It might be. I feel like I might have seen it, but it is quite common to the one under it, so I might have just mistaken it. I want to say I've seen it, but I could be wrong.
The Bozdogan, I've not seen those in game. It could just be I've never encountered them, or I use other maces tend to, at any rate. I know in the late game I tend to go more towards the hammer side and compared to flails. But I've definitely seen the three-headed flail, the Knightly Warhammer, and I think the reinforced flanged mace.
So
those are going to be your typical late games.
Which of the three would you say is your go-to?
My go-to is typically the Knightly Warhammer. I have a penchant to farm undead dungeons whenever I play maces. I like to go in there and I like to get the Hero Sarcophagus, and the Knightly Warhammer drops from that. So you can very easily, quickly rock 2 Knightly Warhammers, no problem, whether you dual wield or not. And most things go down. Now, I know it's built more for tanking, but if you're doing like single mace with a shield, I mean, this is pretty much all you need. You know, yes, it only does daze, but again, if you crit or if you daze on a daze, they get stunned anyway. And it has very nice armor damage and armor pen, very accurate. Just overall, in my opinion, quite a good weapon. That being said, I think overall I do find the three-headed flail to be better, stat-wise. Simply because it's got very high crit, like a stupidly high crit at 7%. Crit efficiency bonus 15%, not as good as the axe, but it's not meant to be. Good body part damage. It's basically like a flail that tries to be an axe in that respect. And then it has 5 bleed, 5 days, 5 stun. Holy crap, what a good weapon on that. You know?
Yeah, I mean, but at the
30 crushing, 4 piercing, very high damage. In fact, the highest damage of a bludgeoning weapon in the game at 34.
Yeah, but I mean, you are taking that fumble chance. It's pretty high compared to many of the others. So that's probably the trade-off. You may be missing more, and plus the minus accuracy too.
Yeah. When you use flails, I feel like it's necessary to go combat mastery to offset that fumble chance. Otherwise, you're just going to have a sad day. You're going to be fumbling all the time. But man, looking at the weapon, it looks nice.
I kind of have a funny picture in my head of going dual wield and having the three-headed flails in both hands. So you have six heads raining down. Even with 30%, you would imagine one is going to connect.
That's hilarious, actually. Looking at the other late game stuff, we're looking at Crushing 32 as being the standard for high-end damage. We're looking at Decorated Warhammer, which you will realize is the super unique weapon. It's almost impossible to get.
You can only get it through grave robbing.
Yeah, you have to pull it out of a grave. But it's basically a enhanced Knightly Warhammer. Knightly Warhammer, very easier to get in comparison. But that's its direct comparison. And then there's the Mastercrafted Flanged Mace. Accuracy, crit chance, block chance, and daze chance. It's basically the most well-rounded weapon. I think I've seen that for sale in Manshire. Can't absolutely be sure. But very nice overall for what it intends to do. It seems to me that maces tend to be paired with shields. That's why so many more have block chance. Like, I'm looking at all of these, and I don't see one that doesn't have a block chance.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Except for the three-headed flail.
Yeah,
so the flail doesn't have to have it, but most of the hammers and maces do.
All of them look like they'd be capable of a block. I don't see somebody blocking with the three-headed flail. It'd be pretty awkward.
For me, that implies Mace is paired best with shields. However, right on target builds easily as good. I've played right on target where I used most of the time it was a Knightly Warhammer until I switched to Axes late game, and I regretted it by the end of it because I was stunning so well with a high agility build Warhammer. So when you go primarily passives, you don't have to worry about the skills being, more based off strength. So it worked supremely well for me on taking out pretty much everything except for the troll, because I never got to actually fight the troll with the mace. But with a shield or maybe single weapon, I would recommend for maces in general. And I prefer hammers and maces as compared to the flails typically, although I do like the look of the three-headed flail. I want to test it.
Yeah, it just looks badass, so yeah. That always plays a role too.
If only for that fumble chance. It seems absolutely necessary you play combat mastery. At least that seems to be the case for me.
Okay. Well, I think we can cut it off here. So I been making marks on when I need to go through and kind of edit and stuff. So if you want to lead into your outro, and then I'll do my typical outro, and then we'll just close it out.
Okay. We do need to do one thing before we do the outro, and that is like final impressions on the tree. Which tree
that's a good point.
So I'll ask you yours, and then I'll do mine, and then I'll do my outro, and then you finish it up.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. Just do 3, 2, 1 when you're ready.
Okay. 3, 2, 1.
Okay, I think we've gone over the trees. We've definitely given an in-depth analysis. Now it is time to wrap this up. And to wrap it up, we are going to give our final impressions of both trees and which we prefer. Beardo, tell me your impressions and your preference.
So this discussion was definitely a lot more difficult to pick one or the other. They're both pretty fun and pretty good to run with. I am actually playing both in the 2 playthroughs I'm doing right now. But if it comes down to it, I'm going to have to go with axes just because I like breaking everybody's body parts, and that execution skill, while I do like a lot of stuff from maces, there's nothing to compare to execution and just slicing someone's head off every single time. What about you, Darley?
I regret the fact I have to make a choice. I love both of these trees so much. I get a really... You said it yourself. I get a massive pleasure just doing a 1-2 combo with axes and smashing someone so badly their head goes flying. But the same can be said when I stun lock an enemy and they can sit there and be completely helpless. When I get into a fight with a bear, the bear will still get some good hits on me with an axe. With a mace, I'm sitting there, it's tinking off my shield, and then I just bash its stupid brains in. And there's nothing more satisfying than taking out a bear after you've been hunted by it by like in level 3 and 4 and 5. There's nothing you can do. So they each have their own kind of catharsis when it comes to fighting enemies. And again, we're talking like, which do you prefer? And my percentage is kind of like 100% and 99%. But I think I have to give it to axes as well. That 1% goes to axes. It's just a matter of like chopping people up, seeing that head go flying, doing the 1-2 combo, and getting huge critical hits. Especially when you just go ahead and execute them. I love that. So I'm also going to give it to axes. But again, and I think you would agree, maces are a lot of fun. They're super fun to play.
Well, and their unique combat style compared to the other one-handed weapons too.
I don't think we'll be able to have a comparison this close. That's how good these two trees are, in my opinion. What do you say?
Yeah, I think the The only other discussion that's going to be very close and difficult to decide is Geomancy versus Pyromancy. That's probably the only other time where we're both going to have a hard time picking one or the other.
Well, you might say that. I think I have a preference. But that's going to be it for this episode of Stoneshard Podcast, featuring yours truly and Beardo. I hope you had as much fun watching us as we did talking for you. Don't forget to check out my other vids at 12, 6, and 12. Please hit like and subscribe on his channel and mine if you don't mind. Leave a comment if you have something to say. That's especially important. We want to hear you guys. This is DarLeeLlama signing off. Take care, stay safe, and have a wonderful day. And I'll see you next time.
Yes, and thanks for all the feedback that we got on the last video. You can definitely see we've made many improvements, so keep them coming. Let us know what you think. But thanks for watching. Please like, comment, subscribe, hit that bell notification, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.
Peace.